The Children of the Forest are the mysterious little tree worshippers who have been living in Westeros since long before the first men arrived. But where did the Children of the Forest come from? Now, I admit this is something that doesn't have a lot of evidence for it in the books, that maybe we're never going to know the actual answer. But I do think that there are some things that George has taken inspiration from that can give us at least the best working theory as to where the children actually came from in the first place. One of the things that I've talked about a lot on my channel is how A Song of Ice and Fire seems to draw pretty heavy inspiration from Norse mythology. And if we take a look at the Norse mythology story of the creation of humans, we actually get a clue that is pretty interesting as it relates to the children of the forest. This is actually an idea that I came to while watching a recent David Lightbringer video, which is going to be linked as one of the end cards here at the end of this video if you make it that far. What David brought up is that there is a story in Norse mythology of people surviving Ragnarok by essentially climbing into trees and waiting out the disaster inside the tree. He also pointed out how this mirrors the original creation myth of Norse mythology, where humans were created from trees by the gods. The mythological humans in question are called Ask and Elmba, which obviously sounds a little bit like Adam and Eve, and they play the same role in Norse mythology. The three gods who had a hand in creating them were the gods Odin, Honir, and Lodur. And they were apparently walking through the forest one day, saw some nice trees, and were like, you know what we should do? We should make those into people. Odin shaped each of the trees into man and woman, and then gave them breath. Honir gave them the ability to reason and a soul. And then Lodur gave them the colors and the warmth of life. Now, as I said, Norse mythology shares a lot in common with A Song of Ice and Fire. Norse mythology contains a realm of ice and a realm of fire that are separated by a giant magical gap. And this is obviously very similar to the magical wall, which keeps the icy realm far beyond the north of the wall, and the southern realm full of fiery dragons separate. It also, of course, contains a network of world trees which people used to do human sacrifice in front of, which is obviously very similar to the Weirwood net. And in Norse mythology, when Ragnarok happens, the entire world will be destroyed, the realms of ice and fire will meet, and the cycle of rebirth will begin, the world created anew. As I've talked about many times on my channel, I think that something similar is going to happen in A Song of Ice and Fire. The Long Night is not going to be the end of the world, but rather the beginning of a cycle of rebirth, and a new world can be born from the ashes. The other thing that you should notice about A Song of Ice and Fire is that it oftentimes has pretty straightforward names. The North is the North Kingdom, and the Riverlands is the place with all the rivers, the Westerlands is the place to the west, and you get the idea. So, when you combine the Norse mythology inspirations with this pretty straightforward naming convention, I think it makes a lot of sense that the Children of the Forest could definitely mirror one of these stories from Norse mythology. Depending on whether or not you think this is the first stage of Westeros or they've gone through these cycles of rebirth before, it would make a lot of sense that the Children of the Forest either hid inside of trees, and that's how they were able to survive, and then eventually, after the cycle of rebirth had begun, they emerged again from the trees. Or if, as I said, this is the first age, they were originally created from the trees. I mean, what better name to give to someone who was either born out of the inside of a tree, or who was originally created from trees than calling them the children of the forest? This would also make quite a bit of sense of the idea of them worshipping the trees, because, generally you do worship the thing that created you. That is, a pretty solid idea if you're going to worship something, right? This would also make for an interesting sort of situation where the children of the forest go back into the trees when they die, and potentially came from the trees originally, sort of giving new meaning to the whole idea of ashes to ashes, where in this case the ashes are ash trees. Or I guess in this case it's weirwoods to weirwoods. I also find the whole idea of the Norse myth where people crawled into trees to survive Ragnarok a very interesting parallel to the children of the forest living in their warded magical tree towns, which is another thing that we've talked about on the channel. Also, you just have to look at Bloodraven with his singular eye being strapped up to the world tree, and you get some pretty heavy Odin symbolism. Same thing with John, to be honest, with his scratch across his eye that he got from an eagle, and then the raven perched on his shoulder. He is looking very Odin-like when he has ascended to Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Really, the more you look at the world building of A Song of Ice and Fire, the more Norse mythology parallels you begin to see. So I think it would make a lot of sense if these children of the forest were born from trees in the same way that people were supposedly born from trees and survived Ragnarok and then crawled out of trees when you take a look at Norse mythology. All of this stuff adds up to the point where I basically now consider this my headcanon, even though I admit we don't really have any solid hard evidence that this is indeed what happened. But I am really curious to hear what you all think of this idea down in the comments. Is this something that's going to be a part of your headcanon as well, unless George gives us a more direct, straight answer? And I know this isn't as long as most of the videos on my channel, but to be honest, this theory isn't as in-depth as most of the things that I talk about, and there's not really a ton to go on considering we're going back into speculating about very ancient events that aren't really even talked about in the books. It's much more of just looking at a potential inspiration for George. Also, in real life, I have been incredibly busy this week, so it was either I had to pull out a quicker theory like this or nothing, and this was something that I wanted to talk about at some point anyway, so I figured now was the perfect time. If you're new to the channel, I have plenty of other videos that you can check out after this if you're itching for more interesting content, and maybe hit that like and subscribe button before you go. If you've seen all of my videos already, as I said, there's going to be a David Lightbringer video as one of the end cards here, so be sure to check that out as it covers some similar topics, and as I said, watching that video is the thing that gave me inspiration for this idea. And with that, thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back with something else very soon.